searching for a longer day. People feeling like the light has just come. We must never stop the way. Birds jumping and I hear my name, grasping into a life. Life is happy but it's so insane. We must merely make a start. Savannah, I'm coming home. Savannah, we'll never be alone. Savannah, the beauty of the world. Savannah, let's all take a walk. Savannah. Lions go.
What's going on, everybody? We are live. Welcome to episode 8 of Just Chatting Seahawks. If you're on the stream at Twitch, appreciate you joining live. If you're watching this on YouTube, appreciate that as well. So last week we were recapping the NFL draft, some of my thoughts on the picks, kind of the initial takes versus the digested take a week after. If you guys are interested in seeing that, just go to my YouTube page, check out episode 7. It's also currently my pinned tweet on Twitter for now. So, again, I appreciate everybody's support. This has been pretty cool. Every episode, it seems like we're getting a little bit more engagement. So, yeah, let's get it kicked off. I wanted to, well, last week I sort of teased something I kind of apologize for. I wasn't able to get Matty F. Brown this week. It's a little bit hard to get things organized with him, just being as he's in a different country and a different time zone. So we'll probably have him in the future to get his insight on the Seahawks in 2020. I'm looking forward to that. But this week you just got me. I'm sorry, unfortunately. We will get more guests going forward. But anyways, without further ado, I guess we can get into some of the recent news since we last spoke. A few things have happened, some good, some bad. I guess let's start with the bad and get that out the way. The Earl situation. Unfortunate if you guys haven't heard. We won't deep dive into it or anything, but by now you've probably heard about the domestic dispute with Earl and his wife Nina Thomas. Again, we'll get into the details. It's pretty embarrassing. I just want to say it's kind of unfortunate when you have that big of a platform that your personal life is unfortunately news to everybody, especially snakes like TMZ, right? Who sort of like holds your personal issues as leverage for money to make money. It's a really unfortunate situation. But I guess this is a safe space, right? We can talk a little bit about it. And, growing up, I was somebody who experienced, my parents split. My father, I'm not going to give you a sob story, but, my father committed adultery. My parents divorced. I grew up with my mom as well as my sister. I didn't take it that hard, but, my sister did take it pretty hard. And so if there's anybody that I feel sorry for in this situation, it's Earl's kids, right? Because unfortunately his actions or their parents' actions, as they get older, everything in this internet age is going to be out there. So, I mean, this will all blow over in time, but it's just unfortunate for the kids. I don't really feel as sorry for the parents. I mean, it's a sad situation overall, but fellas, take care of your business at home, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But, I tweeted something that seemed a little bit controversial around the time that it happened, and I'll bring that tweet up. just so you guys can see it if you haven't already. Essentially, what it was is like some super dumb tweet about who I would retire in terms of like the original LOBs, um, jersey numbers. And ultimately, I was speaking with Griff, See Mike Spin Move, about it earlier, and he has the correct take, right? That we don't need to choose one. We can celebrate these guys equally in time, maybe minus Browner, right? But um, a lot of what was getting misconstrued here in this tweet was that I was putting Earl Thomas or Richard Sherman on the same pedestal as Brandon Browner, who was arrested for committing an attempted murder. Let me just clear the air. I obviously don't think those are in the same vein. That's silly, right? But nevertheless, you got people in here that took it that way. So I just wanted to clear the air and say, obviously, that's not the case. There's levels to it. I think with Sherm, um, it's his own unique situation where obviously the team was looking to move on from him, whether it was because of his personality issues. It was a combination of things, right? You want to call it him not drinking the Kool-Aid anymore. He had the Achilles injury. He was getting a little bit older, so they were starting to look. They were, if you guys remember around the end, they were putting out, bait in the media for potential trade offers with Richard Sherman. They didn't get what they were looking for. See, we know what ultimately ended up happening, but I just think the relationship and the way things ended for 39, 25, and 29 all were unfortunate, right? It wasn't a happy ending, and that's just the nature of the business most of the time. It's just those were some of my greatest memories as a Seattle Seahawks fan. So it just kind of hurt me to see the way it ended, and then even with Cam, the game being taken away from him early, and him being forced into medical retirement. Just an unfortunate situation for all four of those guys. But maybe in time, like some of the others have indicated, things will smoothen over. People will move on. I will move on from my, whatever hurt feelings, if you want to call it. It's not like I'm losing sleep over it, but as a fan, just this like unblemished picture of the LOB era that I thought it was. Obviously, it wasn't. We can't pretend like it wasn't, or we can't pretend like it was rather. So, just wanted to clear the air on that. I wish the best for Earl and hope everything goes well for him. I'm glad, obviously, that nobody was hurt, and that's a silly situation. It's embarrassing. There's sad parts to it. There's hysterical parts to it, like getting caught like with your brother. That's like, come on, like maybe I'm not gonna tweet that, but there's certain parts of this. It's like, what are you doing, man? Come on, like we're gonna have a laugh at that, and it's unfortunate all the way around. But anyways, won't blabber on too much more about it. Um, but the whole like retirement jersey thing, even it just came up because, I saw that DJ Dallas had requested 31 from Cam, and of course Cam's fine with it. But I just personally, that's the explanation of this tweet and some of the discourse that's been going on over the last week is rookies are getting jersey numbers now, right? And it's getting out there in the media, and so it's just a silly thing that fans do is have takes on the jersey numbers. We were talking about Jaron Reed potentially going and getting Clowney's number, and then we found out that's not the case. It was a whole charade, and people are trying to foreshadow what does this mean about Clowney if Reed's taking his number. Schneider sort of poo-pooed that in the media last week, and then we find out he's not getting his Clowney's number. So it was just a funny thing. But then I saw DJ Dallas getting 31, and I just thought, like, man, if there was one person of that era that it really embodied what it meant to be a Seahawk on and off the field, I thought it was Cam Chancellor. And that's the whole point of this tweet. That's the whole point of the discourse was he just was, and he was also my favorite player. So I admit that I was a little biased in that. But anyways, just kind of wanted to clear the air on that so nobody has hurt feelings over it or anything. It's just one of those things that, unfortunately, text gets misconstrued. When you're just looking at text, like it happens all the time when you're texting with your friends on your phone or you're reading something, things can get misconstrued occasionally. So anyways, I guess the other big news was the schedule release. We finally got the official schedule yesterday. Let's take a look at that and kind of go through. Um, I guess I don't like to do. It's silly to do wins and losses, but I guess we could do it just for the fun of it. And just kind of take a look objectively, like what's good, what's bad about it. I mean, overall, I think this is a pretty good schedule, guys. It doesn't look too bad. You get the NFC East. The prime time games seem pretty cool, but I kind of wonder how the Patriots game at home is going to be without Brady at the helm. I think just in general, people are interested in how the Patriots are going to look, with Brady and Gronk being at the Bucks. So that'll be an interesting. You get that one in the first quarter of the season. The opener, though, at the Falcons, some people might look at this as the Falcons are kind of on the mend, but we should be able to take care of business here. And yeah, I think mid-season form, we should be able to take care of this. We got to remember though, like last year too, guys, with the Bengals, they ended up being the worst team in the league, and we got them the first week of the season. And there's reasons for why we came out flat and looked the way we did, but ultimately, you can't sleep on the early part of the season, right, where the team's not mid-season form, and we're just kind of coming together. We're kind of building towards cohesion with the offensive line, timing with the receivers and the quarterback, the defense playing together. Um, there's a lot of like kinks and rust to knock off, and won't that be true this year if we have a season with most of the preseason and at least from what we know now, an abbreviated rookie minicamp and OTAs, and who knows what happens with training camp and ultimately the preseason games. We might come out really, really flat and going all the way across the country week one for that early morning game. Um, that might, I don't want to say be a trap game, but it might be one that sneaks up on us. I don't want to say it's a loss, but for sure. But I'm not as confident about that opening road game as maybe some of you guys are. Let me know what you think about the Falcons game. I think the Patriots game at home is going to be a win. I just think there's something still magical about primetime night games here in Seattle. It might not be what it used to be, but it's overall still a pretty good place to play, or it's a pretty good home field advantage rather for the Seahawks. And again, I just think the Patriots are going to be kind of going through they're transitioning into a new era. So I think we're catching them at a good time early in the season, and I think that'll be a win, and it'll be something that people look forward to. Dallas at home, I think that's going to be a close one that we ultimately win. Miami on the road should be able to take care of business with that, but again, going across the country for those morning games, we didn't seem to have as big of an issue with it these last couple years as it was earlier in the Pete Carroll, John Schneider era. Uh, but again, we should be able to take care of business there. And then the reoccurring theme, which seems to be the Vikings in prime time, we finally get them. Not we finally. Sorry, we get them again here at home as opposed to at Minnesota. I think. I think we'll be able to handle this again with the home field advantage in prime time. And so those first four games, guys, I think the really the only ones that I'm super worried about are the Falcons game and then maybe the Dallas game. But I think the team going into the bye week can have a winning record with only maybe one or two losses, and so that's pretty good. You know, hopefully we stay relatively healthy throughout the season, but the bye week and injuries also play a big part in those one or two losses that seem to matter at the end of the year when you're talking about playoff seeding. Being healthy at the end of the year is great, but also having your bye week at the right time is something that's just it's random. It's hit or miss. Some people think it's better to have it earlier in the year or later in the year. I just think it really has to do with, do you have any big injuries, and are you able to get better or get those guys better during that bye week time? I think that's what it boils down to. So And then Cardinals on the road. I think this is actually going to be, we usually do pretty well in Arizona, but I think that's going to be a pretty tough game this year. The Cardinals brought in a pretty decent draft class. They added DeAndre Hopkins. I think Kingsbury and that sophomore jump of Kyler Murray is going to happen, and they're going to be a much better team this year. I think the NFC West in general is probably going to be one of the best, if not the best, division in football this season. So I would say that might be a loss there. So I think we ultimately end up splitting with all of our division opponents, um, and I have the home game with the Niners as a win, but the let me go to the live screen so you guys can kind of see the schedule here. I mean to be on intermission still. So we're down here now at the Bills with Week 9. The Bills on the road. I don't know what to make of this one. This might be the first quote unquote trap game if you believe in those. Um, Bills can be a meme or they can be a team that upsets. I guess it really just depends on the growth of their team this year. Being a wild card team last year, do they get any growth out of Josh Allen? They've got Stephon Diggs there now, so he adds an element that they've been looking for some time. Um, they lost a couple pieces on defense. Shaq Lawson went to Miami. They still have Jerry Hughes and a few other guys there um, that make them a formidable team. This is definitely a team that gets memed on, but a team that you don't want to sleep on. And so that's another one of those things where you're going across the country for the morning game. If you're not hyped, if you're not ready, they might, get a quick early lead on you and you'll be chasing them the whole game. Um, I don't know if that's a win or a loss. Let me know what you guys think. But the back half of this schedule, I won't go through it every single week and do the whole prediction, but I think ultimately, the primetime games look good. I think we split with the division. I think we take care of business at home. Having these two division games like they usually do every year provides an opportunity for an extra primetime game. If the division's on the line between one of these opponents, I can see that Week 17 game being meaningful in the playoff race again. Last year we got it at home. This year they're going to get it in San Francisco. So I think that's the Niners aren't going to go anywhere. I think the Rams aren't going anywhere. And again, like I said, I think the Cardinals are going to be a formidable opponent. So although I do think of the three, these two would be our biggest threats. So that's kind of my initial thoughts on the schedule. I think they're about an 11-win team on paper. Obviously, that means nothing right now. Even putting a number on it seems kind of silly, but when you have the coach and the quarterback, you kind of see what they're doing. You see what's going on with the teams in the division getting better. You can't really say like, oh, this is for sure a 13-win schedule, and you can't really say you're going to be terrible. It's an 8 or 9-win schedule, and then the factor of health, all of that plays obviously a massive factor in it as well. So it's just a fun thing that fans like to do. We can do right here with it finally dropping. So. And I've seen mostly people's takes are about the same. It seems to be a conglomerate of just about double-digit wins, just like they were last year and the year before. So I guess next we can move on to the team building section, which I guess the biggest news was that we finally got the Bruce Irvin contract. Let me bring up OTC so we can look at that. And it turns out he got $5.9 million is the cap hit for Bruce Irvin this year, guys. And I wanted to see the details of the contract to sort of indicate it, what the team felt. Was he a guy that was going to for sure make the final roster, or was he going to be a guy that was kind of a fringe dude that's competing for a job. And yeah, he's going to compete for a job, but when you've got a $5.9 million salary hit and you're guaranteed $5 million of it, which is what Bruce Irvin is owed this year, that indicates to me he's going to make the final roster no matter what his role is, whether it be a part-time Leo, part-time Sam linebacker. You can pretty much bank on him making the final roster. So um, what that impacts down the road, I guess we'll see in camp and in preseason. Like I said in last week's episode, it's going to be really interesting because there's a log jam at Leo defender with uh, excuse me, Alton Robinson, Bruce Irvin, Benson Mayoa. They brought all these guys that are like 260, 255, 265, sort of in that Leo range, not true 5 tech range. And we still they're sort of like some of the other guys have indicated, and I indicated last week. Rasheem Green's really the only true 5 tech that you have there, and so you haven't brought any other competition. Obviously, if you brought Clowney back, he would probably be that guy. But until that happens, if at all, it's going to be really interesting to see how they divvy out all the reps to these guys. So, because like I said, man, it's just such a log jam with Leo, and if Bruce Irvin plays a little bit of Sam, the implications of what you do at linebacker, because you drafted one in the first round, you still have KJ Wright on the roster. What are you going to do with Barton? He needs to be out on the field, and you've got the best middle linebacker in the game still, Bobby Wagner. So, anyways, that was the big news. So the update on cap space, now that we finally have his numbers, is we're sitting about, when you factor in rookie money, when you factor in buffers for practice squad guys and IR, you're looking at about $15 million here, despite what OTC says here. That's not a true cap number, but it's pretty close. We're about 15 million above the cap, and so people are still kind of wondering, like, what do you do with that extra money? We still have a couple holes. Do you pay Clowney now? What's the timeline on Clowney? What's going on? Guys, just to kind of reiterate, I think the ball is still in Clowney's court, and I just don't think there's really a rush for him to make a decision at this point with the abbreviated off season, not being able to do medicals with other teams. I think he wants to wait until the travel bans, or the not travel bans, but once the shelter in place for so many of these cities lifts, he can go and visit other teams' doctors and potentially get a better offer from another team, which might end up happening. But I just don't see what the rush is, and I am one of the rare few that think like you shouldn't just keep upping your number to lure Clowney back in. Could they use the services? Obviously, but I just don't like when the front office, negotiates from a point of desperation. Just don't think it's a good look. I don't think it's good business practice, and ultimately, I would like to see, some better value with the younger guys. If like Darrell Taylor becomes a 3-down impact player, and he's Clowney light, or he's your 3-down Leo starter from day one, and Rasheem Green's there. I know I'm not making a really good argument for just passing on Clowney. Like I said, I'd love to have him back, but I don't think it's necessarily doomsday if you don't get him back, guys. I just think that again, the team should not be negotiating. I don't think they should just be upping the number until Clowney says yes. I think it's important to let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. When you put an offer on the table and you say you've got, this is the offer, take it or leave it, and the longer you wait, the lower the number gets, that has to mean something. It has pros and cons for the team, and it just means more that you're not going to go back on your word. Your words mean something, when your yes means yes and your no means no. So we won't ramble on too much in a philosophical stance, but that's kind of my take on you know the Clowney thing and why I don't see that happening anytime soon. You know, last week we had I think it was DMC in the chat. He was asking me about comp picks and what the update was on that. So I looked into it, and obviously I think we're not going to be there's not going to be any comp picks for Seattle this year. I don't think because they just didn't lose enough. I think even if Jadeveon Clowney signs with another team elsewhere, um, you just sign too many free agents. And the way compensatory picks are awarded is it's sort of this plus minus ratio of how many unrestricted free agents did you bring in. Um, Granted, they make the minimum qualifying contract price, so you can't just like a unrestricted free agent that makes veteran minimum doesn't equate in the compensatory like it doesn't factor in the compensatory equation. So it's just significant contracts, and like if you sign a guy that was cut, or if you trade like Dunbar doesn't count. Um, I think Olsen counts. So my whole point on this is Seattle's probably not going to get comp picks, and there's been a lot of talk about what's the strategy with comp picks, and I think there's an increased value nowadays since they became tradable commodities. But you're starting to notice that Seattle doesn't really. It's like one year they protect them, next year they don't. One year they protect them, next year they don't. So they don't really have a constant theme on compensatory picks. Um, though it may have seemed like it last year when they were protecting them, they didn't the year before and they didn't this year. So I just don't know if it's a 1 year on, 1 year off thing, or they just haven't figured it out yet. But um, Seattle signed too many unrestricted free agents, and therefore are they didn't lose enough. Like they only lost George Fant and Quentin Jefferson in terms of qualifying compensatory um, like free agents that we lost that made enough money to factor in. I know I've just word souped that. Let me know if that answers your question, DMC. But I appreciate the question too. So, um, and then the other bit of news was, we mention him every week. Why not this week, right? The release of Nas Jones. So, the defensive tackle room was already one that we were sort of questioning was incomplete. It was light, and then they released their former third round pick, who had been placed on IR the last 2 years. Looked pretty promising his first year, guys. Again, I just don't know what the heck happened with Nas Jones. Excuse me. And I'm not going to speculate it further than I already have. Hope he lands on his feet with another team, but um, it's just kind of it just magnifies the current situation of the defensive tackle room where you've got Reed, you've got Poona Ford, but after that you've got like DeMarcus Christmas and that's pretty much Brian Monet and some unrestricted free agents, guys. Um, so it's good to have competition, but it's also like, well, what are you guys planning on doing? Are you going to bring in a veteran free agent? There's Damon Snacks Harrison, Brandon Meebane, these old 1 year kind of stopgap guys that they like to get, like we mentioned in the past. There's a few of them out there. They showed interest in a guy like Mike Daniels last year, who ultimately went to Detroit. Could they go after somebody like him? Possibly. A young guy like Hassan Ridgeway from Texas kind of intrigues me. Liked him coming out of college a couple years back. Um, he's 25 years old, so there's just not a whole lot of availability in terms of defensive tackle. And so it just kind of enforces the thought that I've been having, which is, LJ Collier moving inside, maybe getting another look at DeMarcus Christmas because we didn't see him at all last year with him being on IR. Um, you know, Maybe they feel better about the guys they have internally. Maybe they have a better plan in place. Maybe it's just not something that we see the vision of yet. Or maybe it's just a bad plan. There's that factor too, right? That they double down on youth and it doesn't work out for them. That's entirely possible. But of the risks to take, guys, I think that's one that I sort of like to defend more often, going with youth over 1 year stopgap veterans that you know aren't going to be here for the long haul. Like there is a value in having that 1 year veteran presence, obviously, but like we've said multiple times here before, it sort of also blocks the young guys from getting significant reps. And I think both with Collier and DeMarcus Christmas, who missed so much time last year, it's imperative for guys like that to get on the field somehow. And I just think if you're going to bring in a Brandon Meebane or a Mike Daniels, a Snacks Harrison who may have a couple of years left, but you're really only going to sign to a 1 year deal, I just think that hurts them in the long run. So, especially for a guy like Collier who is a little bit older, um, every year on that rookie contract that goes by that they're not a contributor, you're losing out on tremendous value. So, I mentioned it before, but like I said, just kind of reinforcing the way they've handled the defensive tackle position, the five tech position, is sort of reinforcing some of my opinions that I've brought up in the past. So we've talked about defensive tackle. I wanted to have Matty F. Brown on here to talk about the nickel situation. You can kind of see the defensive back room. There's a ton of guys that they brought in. The guys labeled in green are rookies, and pretty much all these guys are unrestricted free agents in this area. Jason Stanley is already a pro that they claimed off of waivers. Ryan Neal is a restricted free agent that they brought back. I think he was on their practice squad last year, guys. Correct me if I'm wrong. They brought back Nico Thorpe, who's going to probably be a primary special teams player as he's made a decent career out of it already. But a guy like Nico Thorpe's not going to hit all of a sudden another tier where he becomes a starter. He's just a familiar guy who knows the system, that's going to be a key contributor on special teams, and can play a couple games in an injury situation or down, a couple drives or a couple games if you have an injury. That's the value in bringing a guy like Nico back. But the starting three, it just, like I said, we talked about it a little bit before, but it seems that Quinton Dunbar is a little bit more natural on the outside. And so people are jumping the gun saying that he is going to be the replacement for Trey Flowers because, Trey Flowers had, a rough going last year, but I don't think that's necessarily the case, guys. I think I could be wrong, but my best guess is that your starting three corners are going to be some form of Shaquille Griffin, Trey Flowers, and Quinton Dunbar in a nickel situation. Do I know who the nickel corner is? I don't. I'm projecting it to be Amadi, but it could be Dunbar. He doesn't. That's probably not optimizing Dunbar's skill set, but it could be him. Um, I wanted to have Matty on because he thinks that Shaquille Griffin could potentially play some significant roles in nickel, because if they sort of double down on base defense again, guys, where they're primarily playing three linebackers and only two corners, you could have Shaquille Griffin playing left cornerback like he usually does most of the time, but then when you want to bring out nickel defense, you slide Griffin on the inside, and you have your outside corners Dunbar and Flowers. And I sort of starting to get the vision of that, especially if their plan is to, like I said, play base defense as their primary, personnel grouping. Most teams, their primary base defense is nickel now, so they rely on having a dedicated nickel corner. And Seattle's done that in the past too. They've had a Jeremy Lane, they've had a Walter Thurman, they've had who was the guy they got from the Colts that was kind of small? I'm blanking on his name, but I couldn't forget Justin Coleman either. They've had guys that they're sort of dedicated nickel corners, but now they don't necessarily have one. And Matty doesn't think that Ugo Amadi is necessarily a great nickel fit either, just because he knows the X's and O's of the position. He doesn't think that he physically has the tools to do it, being a slow three cone time, sort of a poor tackler coming out of college. That doesn't mean that he can't grow, but there's only so much when you're talking about physical limitations that you can overcome with technique if you don't, like I said, you don't have the size or the athletic traits. So Ugo's going to be one of those guys, like I've mentioned in the past. If he has a long career, it's because he's a high IQ, football IQ guy. He's a cerebral player. He plays with technique. He relies on that over his athleticism. And the other question or the other projection for me might be that he plays just backup free safety. And then, like I said before, we have the nickel package, but Griffin's on the inside and he's your nickel corner. That could be a plan. When we heard Pete's press conference after the draft, one of the reporters was asking, well, nickel's still kind of a question mark. You guys didn't address it in the draft. You haven't added anybody in free agency. What's the plan there? And Pete sort of gives this cryptic response of like, you'll see what I've got something in mind. I've got a plan. You'll see it coming, or you'll see what's coming. And I just, that leads me to believe that there's something creative going on, something a little bit unorthodox. That sort of response doesn't strike me as yeah, we're going to plan on picking up a guy in phase 4 of free agency, or we're going to trade again like they did for Justin Coleman. We're just gonna rely on our ability to evaluate underrated corners out there that people are sleeping on. That doesn't sound like that's going to happen. Again, I'm not saying like I'm ruling anything out. I'm just saying, gun to my head, if I had to pick one thing, I kind of like where Maddie's head's at with the whole Shaquille Griffin sliding into the nickel spot. If nickel is going to be, used only limitedly. Because again, guys, you've got to figure out a way to get your best 3 corners out on the field, and that's clearly Griffin, Flowers, and Dunbar. I don't see Blair learning nickel. As I mentioned before, he needs to stick as strong safety, guys, and he needs to be the starter this year, if not by the start of next year. With McDougald being in a contract year, if he gets injured, I could see Blair taking that job and never giving it back to McDougald. I could see Blair beating McDougald out just in overall competition and being the week 1 starter this year. That's also a possibility. And then you start to talk yourself into, is McDougald trade bait, or do you like having him as depth? I think they would probably like having him as depth, particularly for like big nickel packages where you can have 3 safeties on the field, Diggs, McDougald, and Blair. I think they would ultimately keep McDougald around. I think that's why he was never considered a cap casualty this offseason, why they ultimately probably won't trade him if he has any trade value out there right now. We saw McDougald physically decline a little bit last year, but it's just a nature of the beast. He's getting up there. He's getting closer to 30. Those skill positions. It happens to everybody, guys. So, and obviously the Seahawks did their due diligence in taking Blair at where they did in the second round last year. So, they saw it coming before it started to happen. Tip my cap to them. But again, like I said about value, want your young rookie guys while they're on those cheap contracts to get out there sooner, so you can maximize the value, financial value, before they're up on their contracts and all of a sudden they're looking for big money. Think of how great Golden Tate was, but it took Golden Tate a while, guys, to really blossom and really be a cog, a real key contributor to the team. It didn't happen until his like 3rd year or contract year, and then that was one that got away for sure. That John regrets probably to this day, that he's probably still loses sleep over. But at the time, I could see where he was justifying letting him go with only 1 year of production in the system. Maybe I'm off on that, but they seem to handle the Paul Richardson situation the same way. You're sort of not fully blossoming until that contract year. Obviously, Richardson, P. Rich was an injury concern or injury-prone guy, and Golden was different, whether it was maturity or handling the pros or just getting his opportunity to get on the field. For whatever reason, each of those guys didn't get their second contract in Seattle. But to loop it back to maximizing the contract value, those were guys that you didn't really get a whole lot of value out of. It was cool to see them have those years before they got paid, and good for them getting paid elsewhere. But in terms of what they did for Seattle, there wasn't a ton of value while they were here in the years that they were there, and that's because there were guys in front of them that were taking up their potential reps. Um, so yeah, that's kind of the situation with Nickel. It's still TBD. We brought forth a sort of a creative scenario based on what Pete's cryptic messaging was. Because we don't see Blair moving there. Maybe he learns it just because they ask him to. But ultimately, his future state is it should be the starting strong safety, defensive tackle. Again, I think they'd be comfortable with the internal guys between Collier, Puna, and Christmas Monet versus paying a guy like Snacks Harrison $8 million or whatever his market value is right now, for 1 year of play. I think they could do either, but they're comfortable if they don't overpay. Brandon, appreciate the birthday wishes, man. Yeah, 29 feels old, dude. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like the shelter in place thing. I've been so like cooped up in my house, but between like being on the dawn of hitting my 30s and and being like I'll be transparent. I'm depressed, man. Like I got laid off like in late March, and I just been at home playing video games every day. Almost 30. Like all this crap started to happen. It's like it's very doom and gloom right now. I'm fine. It's just I know other people got it way worse out there, dude. But I appreciate the wishes. It's just I would say after 25, man. I stopped looking forward to birthdays, man. Wanted to turn the clock back. So yeah, no, but I appreciate you joining the stream, dude. I think this is your first time here, so hope everything's going with you and going well with you and your family. And yeah, man, crazy times. Hopefully they start to get better soon. So we've talked about DT, nickel cornerback. The left tackle I had sort of alluded to earlier in earlier podcasts that, well, not earlier, but last week. So, they brought in somebody to replace Tremaine Ifedi, guys, but the future left tackle's not on the roster right now. And they didn't address it in the draft, and that was part of the initial knee-jerk reaction as to why I was like, why did they take Lewis when they could have taken the Jones kid from Houston? I'm sure they have their own reasons, right? But I just felt like, from where they picked Lewis in the late 60s, knowing that they traded away that one pick 101, not picking until 133, I just thought they really had to hit on a positional need because they weren't going to be picking forever, and the meat of the draft was gonna bypass them. And they just didn't get the tackle. And so, like I said last week, Dwayne Brown's only getting older, guys. It's crazy. Like, if he goes down, this team's in really rough shape. And so, to me, future left tackle is easily the number one priority on this team right now for future state. You guys can say what you want about Clowney. I still think it's left tackle. You might say, well, at least we have a veteran in place for 2020. With Clowney not being in-house, we can't say the same thing. So I understand that's a fair argument to make. I just think without Clowney, we can manufacture sacks and pressure with the guys that we brought in, guys. If Clowney came in and he went and he got injured, I think we'd still be able to make a decent run at the playoffs. I think if Dwayne Brown and still be able to operate and still be able to do mostly everything that we wanted to do from a defensive line perspective. If we lost Dwayne Brown, we're in rough shape. We're talking about potentially like miss the playoffs type rough shape. Cedric Ogbuehi is a former first rounder, but he hasn't done anything to this point in his career. Jamarco Jones, you can make an argument that he's a better guard prospect than he is a tackle, and he's being kicked out back to his college position, which is right tackle. And he's probably not even going to start over Shell. I'm not saying that's for sure, but Can we really count on him being the future left tackle? I'm not. I don't think the future left tackle's on the roster, guys. And so that's scary to me. That's a really scary situation to me. If Dwayne Brown takes another uh, big declining step, which we saw last year, if he has another big injury, um, we're in rough shape there. So I think that's, like I said, that's easily the number one priority post draft, is future state left tackle for me. And, you know, I haven't jumped into next year's class yet, but, speaking with Will, um, he's been doing some film cut ups for Penei Sewell, Oregon Ducks left tackle. And this guy is actually projected to be like the best tackle prospect coming out next year, and probably in the last 5 years. He looks that good, guys. I've watched a little bit of him. I don't think Seattle's going to have a shot at him, just because they're probably going to have to pick in the top 5 to even have a shot at him. But um, I'll get into probably tackle prospects a little bit earlier this year. I know that's probably not going to be the most interesting thing. But if we have a delayed season, then maybe that's an opportunity for content to put out there that people will be interested in. But again, we'll see. Hopefully that's not the case. Granted, everybody is safe and we're not doing stupid things, right? But just to have football. I'd love to have football back. I hope it doesn't get canceled, but not at the expense of players. Everybody's equal. Players are people too. Coaches are people too. If they find a way to do it, great. If it seems sketchy, then obviously people are going to be upset. The UFC right now, by the way, has a big pay-per-view card tomorrow night. Dana White, the commissioner of UFC, is getting a ton of backlash for continuing business. He's doing it on Native American reservations, or sorry, why am I blanking on the res for short, right? So he's able to continue doing these pay-per-view fights, free of the sort of legislation that everybody else has to operate under. So, anyways, not to get off on a tangent, I just think there's pros and cons to sort of weaving through these current times. If you're a big business person, or a commissioner of a sport, rather, to be specific. So yeah, I think what we need to keep an eye out on, because we do have a little bit more money right now with the 15 mil. So an important date to keep in mind, guys, is June 1st, and that's a month away. If we're going to cut KJ Wright, if we're going to do any other big signings, it's going to be probably within the next 4 weeks, because that becomes the fiscal new year on June 1st, where guarantees, bonuses, roster bonuses, all that stuff kicks in for 2020. So if teams want to cut ties before those guarantees kick in, they got to do it before the fiscal year turns over, and that's June 1st. So when John Schneider talks about phase 4 of player acquisition and free agency, that's what he's talking about. There's still going to be more cuts to come, and I'm not necessarily talking about the Seahawks, but I'm talking about other teams. And they're going to wait to see what other cap teams that are under cap constraints, what they do with their rosters. Like, for instance, the Steelers were one of the most cap tight teams in the league, and they had to let go of BJ Finney. That ended up working to our advantage, guys, because that's a player they didn't want to let go of, according to people close to the situation in Pittsburgh, and just their community in general. They feel like he was a guy that they wanted to keep around, that they just couldn't afford financially. So there's going to be more of those types, and that's what happens before the June 1st turnover. So again, if you're looking for a veteran defensive tackle, Al Woods type, if you're looking for a potential nickel corner, maybe a tackle becomes available, likely not a future starting left tackle. Those rarely get out to free agency, if ever. But some of those veteran pieces that we're still missing, maybe even another 5-tech to help with Rasheem Green, I think you can address that within the next couple weeks. especially if Clowney decides that he's just going to sit this year out or wait until shelter in place lifts and he can't give us a firm answer. And Seattle has to operate um, with the notion that he's not going to be back, and they've obviously done that. Now they've put themselves in a financial spot where they could still bring in Clowney or an Everson Griffin, or those two seem to be the primary names that everybody's stuck on. But specifically with Clowney, because he's going to be more expensive than Griffin, they still have an opportunity to get him back, and they can structure it where they give him a large signing bonus up front, so there's not a big cap hit towards the 15 million or whatever we have in space right now. You can still get Clowney done easily. Don't get that twisted. But again, it's less about the available money, and Seattle, it's just like holding pat for $1 or $2 million, which is what everybody thinks is going on. It's less about that. I mean, it's a little bit of that, but it's more so just like I said before, this is our offer, and we've got a bunch of things we've got to do in the future. It's not just Clowney, and right now, guys, it's Shaquille Griffin, potentially Chris Carson, guys they've got to extend in this upcoming year and years in the future. They look in it at a financial window way more, way down the road, way further down the road than us fans do and capologists do. So um, you have to operate as though Clowney's not going to be around. That's what I'm trying to say. But the bonus is you've positioned yourself to, if he decides to come back, you can't afford him. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So um, that pretty much, that's why I just kind of wanted to wrap on the significant date thing, because June 1st is going to be a big date for phase 4, a player acquisition. From there, we can start to focus on off-season, um, like, dates, like if we're out of shelter in place and people can get back to work, what is OTAs going to look like then? What's training camp going to look like then? Are we as fans going to be able to go and see the competitions break down? That's a really benefit for people like me who study team building. Like, going to camp gives me a lot of insight about who's getting reps where. It gives me a really good idea of where the team views certain guys. Like Bruce Irvin's a perfect example of a guy that I just don't know. Is he more a Leo? Is he more a Sam? Um, how significant is his role going to be here? Is he really going to be a starter? Um, camp's going to kind of give me a good indicator of where they view a guy like Bruce Irvin. I'd love to see where LJ Collier plays. Like I said, is he going to be more of a 3 tech versus a 5 tech? That question can get answered at camp, guys. The battle at wide receiver, David Moore, Philip Dorsett, John Ursua, some of these undrafted cats, Aaron Fuller, a husky that everybody wants to see. Probably, local bias guys want to see make the team. Or if they bring in some other guy in phase 4, they're going to want to see that wide receiver battle play out, and you get a good idea of that at camp. It's a log jam at tight end. We probably won't see the veterans, so that probably won't play out in training camp. Offensive line is always a great one in training camp. Because it could be Shell at right tackle now, but it might be Jermarco. We brought in we brought Upati back, so people assume that he's going to be the starter like he was last year. But don't sleep on Phil Haynes. Let me just put that out there. I heard that BJ Finney is C1. That makes more sense, or that was enforced when we saw the Brit release. It kind of sucks for Posick with all the other guys that we brought in, because again, we're looking at a second rounder that just, where is he going to play? Is he a guard? Is he a center? What do you do with him? At this point, I have no clue. He might not make the roster, guys. I mean, yeah, they increased the roster size to 55. That's only 2. Could you hold an extra offensive line? Yeah, and it probably benefits Posick because he's a natural snapper. So the team could carry an extra center, whereas before they usually have just a guard that's an emergency center. Now you could probably legitimately carry a backup center, and you tender Joey Hunt. So it's like, which one of those guys do you keep around as a backup center? That needs to play out in camp. Um, Backup quarterback, I'm sure they'll probably bring in a veteran to compete with Anthony Gordon. The nickel corner spot will be the hottest of competitions in training camp. So my whole point is, after the June 1st thing, we can start focusing less on player acquisition and more on how is this team really going to come together. Um, Taking it down from a 90-man roster to a 55-man roster. Um, that pretty much wraps it up for tonight, guys. That puts us at about an hour. I know last week we went pretty really long. Doesn't look like we got a whole lot of live viewers, but that's okay. I know you guys got more important things to do than listen to my opinion. But I appreciate everybody who stopped in, even if it was for a couple of minutes. Brendan, I appreciate the birthday wishes, man, and hope you guys are staying safe. Thanks for joining. If you're watching this on a YouTube channel, I appreciate the views there, guys, too, as well. So we'll see next week. If I do an episode, I'll post something on Twitter. I want to get a guest in here. I'm going to try and get Maddie in here, or some form of a guest, maybe somebody from the pod, and just kind of have a chill. I get tired of listening to myself talk. Like, I'm surprised I can even talk to myself for an hour sometimes. But we'll have more guests in the future. That's like I've been teasing it. I promise I'm going to try and do that. So be on the lookout for that. I usually do these on Friday nights, so I don't have an official schedule right now. But if there's not much news going on, I probably will maybe skip that. But I'm usually doing video game streams too. If you guys are into that and you just want to just chill and chat and have a good time, like I'm usually streaming my gaming too. Like, we could do Madden, we could do we could do that when August rolls around and the new game comes out. We're gonna do a bunch of stuff here. So again, appreciate you guys stopping by. It's been real. Hope to see you guys next week or in the future episodes. So talk to you guys in the future. See you.